Rain lashed against the city streets, drumming on the pavement like an unforgiving heartbeat. Nathan had barely taken a sip of his whiskey when the knock came, soft but insistent. He frowned, glancing at the clock. 11:47 p.m. No one came to his apartment this late, not without calling first. When he swung the door open, the last person he expected to see was her. Mia stood there, soaked to the bone, rain-slick hair clinging to her flushed cheeks. Her lips trembled, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, like she was holding in something more than the cold. His pulse stuttered. "Mia?" She exhaled a shaky breath, her eyes shining in the dim light of his hallway. "I didn't know where else to go." His throat tightened. This was his best friend's little sister, the one person who was supposed to be off-limits. But as she stood there, vulnerable and broken, every rule he'd ever set for himself started to crack. Nathan didn't hesitate. He reached for her wrist, pulling her inside and shutting the door behind her. The apartment was warm, but she shivered, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to disappear into the oversized sweatshirt clinging to her frame. "What happened?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it. Mia didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. I had a fight with Jason." Nathan's jaw clenched. Jason, her boyfriend. The guy her brother liked, the guy Nathan had always secretly hated. Not for any real reason, except for the fact that he wasn't Nathan. He grabbed the closest towel from the back of his couch and handed it to her. She took it with shaking hands, rubbing it over her arms absently. "A fight," he pressed, watching her carefully. "What kind of fight?" Mia swallowed, her fingers tightening around the towel. "The kind where you realize you meant nothing to someone. The kind where you hear things you can't unhear." Her voice cracked slightly, and she let out a bitter laugh. "He's been cheating on me for months." Nathan's grip tightened around the glass in his hand. He had never liked Jason, but hearing this, it made his blood simmer. He ran a hand through his hair, forcing himself to stay calm. "That son of a..." "Nathan." Her voice was soft, cutting through his anger. He looked at her. Her big, tired eyes met his, and something in them made his chest tighten. It wasn't just about Jason. This wasn't just a breakup, it was something deeper. "I don't want to talk about him," she said quietly. "Not tonight." Something in the way she said it sent a ripple of unease down his spine. He should have told her to call her brother. He should have driven her home. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer, reaching for the towel and gently rubbing the edge of it against her damp cheek. She shivered under his touch, but she didn't pull away. "Nate," her voice was barely a whisper. He knew this was dangerous. He knew crossing this line was something he could never take back. But as she looked up at him, her breath shallow, her lips slightly parted, his self-control snapped. He cupped the side of her face, his thumb tracing over the curve of her cheek. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. Mia didn't say a word. She leaned in. And suddenly, nothing else mattered. Nathan barely had time to think before her lips brushed against his, hesitant, unsure. A shock of heat tore through him, and for a split second, he froze. This was Mia. The girl he had known since she was too young to even look at him this way. The little sister of his best friend. The one woman he had sworn was off-limits. And yet, she was here, her lips barely touching his, her breath warm and shaky against his skin. She was waiting for him to pull away, waiting for him to stop this before it started. He should have. But he didn't. A low curse slipped from his lips, and then he was moving, closing the space between them, capturing her mouth with his. Mia made a soft sound, her fingers gripping the front of his hoodie as if she needed something to hold on to. The moment their lips fully met, something snapped inside him. He had spent years pretending not to notice her. Years looking away every time she laughed in that way that made his stomach twist. Years fighting the irrational, forbidden thoughts that sometimes crept in when she looked at him like he was more than just her brother's best friend. But now there was no pretending. Nathan deepened the kiss, tilting her chin up, his hand sliding to the small of her back as he pulled her closer. She tasted like rain, like something warm and sweet and completely dangerous. Her fingers curled into his hoodie, her body pressing against his like she needed this just as much as he did. The realization sent fire through his veins. But then she shivered again, her damp clothes clinging to her skin, and reality crashed back over him like ice water. Nathan pulled back, his breathing uneven. Mia's lips were slightly swollen, her eyes hazy, her chest rising and falling with each breath. He swore under his breath and ran a hand over his face. "What the hell am I doing?" Mia blinked up at him, lips parted, confused by the sudden distance. His voice was hoarse. "You're freezing. You need to get out of those wet clothes." Her brows lifted slightly, and then, just like that, the spell was broken. Her cheeks turned pink as she glanced down at herself.
Right.
Nathan exhaled, scrubbing a hand through his hair. "I'll grab you something to wear." Without waiting for her response, he turned and stalked to his bedroom. His hands were shaking as he pulled out a dry hoodie and a pair of sweatpants. This is a bad idea. A really bad idea. When he returned, she was standing in the middle of his living room, arms wrapped around herself. She looked small, vulnerable, nothing like the confident, fiery girl he was used to seeing. He handed her the clothes. "Bathrooms down the hall." Mia took them, her fingers brushing his for half a second before she disappeared into the bathroom. Nathan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He pressed his palms against the kitchen counter, staring at the darkened window. This was dangerous. He needed to stop this before it got worse. Before it became something neither of them could walk away from. But when Mia stepped out of the bathroom, drowning in his hoodie, her hair still damp, and those tired eyes looking at him like he was the only person she trusted, he knew it was already too late. Nathan had never been good at self-control. Not when it came to fights. Not when it came to making reckless decisions. And definitely not when it came to Mia. She sat on his couch, her knees tucked beneath her, wearing his hoodie and sweatpants like she belonged here. The sleeves swallowed her hands, and she kept fidgeting with the hem, looking everywhere but at him. The silence between them was thick, charged.
He should say something.
Tell her she could crash here for the night, sleep in his bed while he took the couch. Pretend like the past 10 minutes hadn't happened. But then she looked up at him. Big, dark eyes. Unsure, a little nervous, but beneath that, something deeper. Something that said she felt it too. His hands curled into fists.
"Mia."
She wet her lips, and damn it, he was already losing the fight. She didn't move at first. Then, slowly, she shifted closer, testing the distance between them. A small movement, barely noticeable, but his body reacted like she had set him on fire. Nathan clenched his jaw. "This is a bad idea." "I don't care." Her voice was quiet but steady, certain. And when she reached for him, soft fingers brushing against his forearm, it was over. A sharp breath left him, and then he was on her, closing the distance in one rough, hungry motion. Mia gasped against his lips, but she didn't pull away. She melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest, gripping onto his hoodie like she never wanted to let go. Nathan groaned, deepening the kiss, his hands tangling in her still damp hair. She tasted like rain and something sweet, something that made his chest ache. This was reckless. This was dangerous. But damn if it didn't feel inevitable. Her body pressed against his, soft and warm, fitting into him like she was always meant to be there. Nathan's fingers skimmed beneath the hem of his hoodie, feeling the smooth skin of her waist, and Mia shivered. "Nate." Her voice was breathless, barely a whisper against his mouth. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Her lips were swollen, her cheeks flushed, and she was staring at him with something dangerously close to trust. His heart slammed against his ribs. "Tell me to stop." Mia shook her head. "I don't want to." His restraint snapped. Nathan caught her mouth again, this time slower, deeper. His hands slid over her body, memorizing every dip and curve. Mia's breath hitched as he kissed his way down her jaw, her neck, tasting the warmth of her skin. Her fingers threaded through his hair, tugging slightly, and he groaned. He was in so much trouble. But for the first time in his life, he didn't give a damn. Nathan woke up to the feeling of warmth curled against his side. For a moment, his sleep-heavy brain didn't register what had happened. He was used to waking up alone, to the quiet hum of the city outside his window. But then the scent of her skin hit him. Something soft, something dangerous. His arm was draped over her waist, her body tucked against his like she belonged there.
Shit.
Reality came crashing back in. His best friend's little sister. In his bed. In his arms. Mia shifted slightly, her bare leg brushing against his, and he nearly groaned. His body still remembered every single way she had unraveled beneath him, the way she had whispered his name like she had been waiting for this as long as he had. And now she was here. In the soft glow of the early morning light, she looked peaceful, her lashes dark against her cheeks, her lips still a little swollen from his kisses. Nathan swallowed hard. This was a mistake. A mistake that felt too damn good to regret. But when she stirred, blinking up at him with those big, sleepy eyes, his chest tightened. For a second, there was no guilt. No panic. Just her, watching him like she wanted this as much as he did. Then, reality slammed back into both of them. Mia's lips parted slightly, her expression shifting. "Oh," she whispered. And just like that, everything felt too real. Nathan sat up, running a hand over his face. "Mia?" She pulled the sheets tighter around herself, suddenly looking small. "I should go." His jaw clenched. "Mia?" She was already moving, sliding out of bed, grabbing her clothes from the floor in a rush. Nathan's gut twisted. "Wait." But she shook her head, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine, Nate." It wasn't. He could see it in the way her hands trembled as she pulled on her sweater, in the way she avoided his gaze. She wasn't regretting what happened. She was regretting what it meant. And he didn't know which one was worse. Mia, just. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, frustration lacing his tone. "We need to talk about this." She paused for half a second, fingers tightening around the hem of her hoodie. Then she shook her head. "There's nothing to talk about. That was a lie. A big one." But before he could argue, she was gone. Nathan sat there, staring at the door long after it had closed behind her. His body still ached from the feel of her. His sheets still smelled like her. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea what the hell to do next. Nathan knew it was only a matter of time before this blew up in his face. He had spent the last week pretending nothing had happened. Pretending he wasn't waking up every morning with the ghost of Mia's touch still burning on his skin. Pretending he didn't replay that night over and over in his head, no matter how hard he tried to push it away. And worst of all, pretending he didn't care that she was avoiding him. She hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't even looked at him when they crossed paths at her brother's apartment a few days ago. It was driving him insane. So when Ethan, his best friend, Mia's brother, showed up at his place, looking pissed, Nathan already had a sinking feeling in his gut. "Ethan," he greeted casually, leaning against the doorframe. "Didn't know you were stopping by." Ethan shoved past him without a word. Nathan sighed and shut the door. "Yeah, this isn't good." Ethan turned on him, his jaw tight, eyes burning with something dangerous. "Tell me the truth," he demanded. "Are you screwing my sister?" Nathan's stomach dropped. There it was. The moment he had been dreading. He could lie. Pretend he had no idea what Ethan was talking about. But he had never been a good liar. Nathan exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders back. "Ethan, are you?" Ethan's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Nathan clenched his jaw. "It's not like that." Ethan let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh, really? Because she sure as hell looked like a mess when I saw her the other night." His fists tightened. "What the hell did you do to her?" Something inside Nathan snapped. He took a step forward, his voice deadly calm. "I didn't do anything to her." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Then explain why she's acting like." "She came to me that night." Nathan cut in. "She was hurt. She needed someone." His voice dropped lower. "And I was there." Ethan went rigid. For a long, tense moment, Neither of them spoke. Then Ethan's expression darkened. So what? You thought you could just take advantage of her while she was vulnerable? Nathan's patience snapped. His fist collided with the wall beside Ethan's head, the force rattling the picture frame hanging there. Ethan didn't even flinch. Nathan's chest heaved. You think I don't care about her?
His voice was rough, raw.
You think this is just some game to me? Ethan's jaw tightened. She's my sister. And she's not a kid anymore. Silence. The truth of that hung heavy between them. Ethan ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. Damn it, Nathan. Nathan swallowed hard. I didn't plan for this to happen. Ethan stared at him, searching his face for something, probably a reason not to break his nose. Then, after a long pause, he stepped back. I swear to God, he muttered, voice low, if you hurt her, I will kill you. Nathan met his gaze, steady and unshaken. I won't. Ethan held his stare for another second, then stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Nathan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had survived this round, but he had a feeling things were about to get a whole lot messier. Mia knew something was wrong the second Ethan walked through the front door. He was tense, more than usual. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched like he was barely holding himself together. She had spent the past week avoiding Nathan, avoiding the way her heart clenched every time she thought about that night. But looking at Ethan now, she knew. He knew. Her stomach twisted. Ethan shut the door a little too hard and turned to face her. Tell me the truth. His voice was eerily calm. Mia swallowed. About what? His jaw ticked. You and Nathan. Her heart stopped. For a split second, she thought about lying, pretending she had no idea what he was talking about. But the look in his eyes, he already knew. She let out a shaky breath. Ethan? Damn it, Mia. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. How long? She hesitated. It was just one night. That was a lie. It was never just one night. Ethan let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it.
Right.
One night. His eyes snapped to hers. So, why the hell does he look like he's ready to burn the world down for you? Her chest tightened. Nathan wasn't over it. And neither was she. I don't know, she whispered. Ethan exhaled roughly, gripping the back of the couch. Do you have any idea what kind of mess this is? Mia straightened. I'm not a kid, Ethan. That's not the point. His eyes burned with frustration. He's my best friend. And you, his voice wavered. You're my little sister. She flinched. That was the real problem, wasn't it? It wasn't about Nathan. It wasn't about her. It was about the fact that Ethan still saw her as someone who needed to be protected. Her hands curled into fists. I can make my own choices. Ethan stared at her, something torn in his expression. Are you choosing him? Mia opened her mouth, then closed it. Because she didn't know. Because Nathan hadn't fought for her. He had let her leave that morning. Hadn't come after her. Hadn't called. But Ethan said he looked like he was ready to burn the world down for her. Her heart pounded. I don't know, she admitted. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. He suddenly looked tired. Just be careful, Mia.
His voice was quieter now.
Nathan's not the kind of guy who lets people in easily. She knew that. She also knew that when he did let someone in, he never let go. And she had a sinking feeling she had been let in a long time ago. Mia wasn't sure what she was doing until she was already outside Nathan's door. Her fingers hovered over the handle, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should walk away. Go home. Pretend none of this ever happened. But she couldn't. Not when Ethan's words kept echoing in her head. Why does he look like he's ready to burn the world down for you? She took a shaky breath and knocked. Seconds passed. Then the door swung open, and there he was, Nathan, standing in the doorway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was messy, his jaw covered in dark stubble, and his gray t-shirt was wrinkled like he'd been gripping the fabric in frustration. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his voice came rough, strained.
Mia.
Her chest ached. We need to talk. Nathan didn't move. Didn't invite her in. For the first time, she thought he might push her away, that maybe she had read everything wrong. But then he exhaled sharply, ran a hand through his hair, and stepped aside. She walked in, feeling every inch of space between them crackle with tension. The door clicked shut behind her. Silence. She turned to face him, heart racing. Ethan knows. Nathan let out a dark laugh. Yeah, I figured when he showed up ready to kill me. Mia swallowed. What did you tell him? Nathan's jaw tightened. The truth. Her breath hitched. And what is the truth, Nate? He dragged a hand down his face, looking exhausted. That I never meant for this to happen. That I never should have touched you. A sharp pain lanced through her chest. He regretted it. Her hands trembled at her sides. So that's it? It was a mistake? Nathan's eyes snapped to hers, dark and stormy. Don't what? Her voice rose. Don't act like that night meant something? Don't ask you why you've been avoiding me? Don't.
Mia.
His voice was low, dangerous. You have no idea how much I want you. Her breath caught. He took a slow step closer, eyes locked onto hers, his body coiled like he was barely holding himself back. I think about you every damn second, he said, voice rough. I can still taste you, still feel you. His hands curled into fists. And it's killing me. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Then why? Her voice broke. Why are you acting like we're over before we even started? Nathan let out a harsh breath. Because I can't have you, Mia. Her stomach dropped. Ethan. I don't give a damn about Ethan.
His voice was sharp, raw.
I care about you. And I don't know if I can be the man you deserve. Her throat tightened. Let me decide that. Nathan shook his head.
You don't get it.
I've spent my whole life keeping my distance from you, making sure I never crossed that line. Because if I did, his voice dropped lower, I wouldn't stop. Mia's breath stilled. She stepped forward. Then don't stop. Nathan's body went rigid. I don't want you to, she whispered. Something snapped. In a flash, Nathan had her pinned against the door, his hands on her hips, his mouth inches from hers. His breathing was ragged, his fingers digging into her like he was barely keeping himself in check. Mia, his voice was strained, a warning. She looked up at him, her heart pounding. I'm not scared, Nate. His grip tightened. You should be. And then he was kissing her.
Hard. Desperate.
Like he had finally lost the war with himself. Mia melted into him, her hands sliding into his hair, her body arching against his. His fingers slipped under her sweater, burning against her skin as he pulled her closer, deeper, like he was trying to erase the space between them. She had thought that night was a mistake. But this was inevitable. Mia didn't know how long they stood there, tangled in each other, stealing breaths like it was the only thing keeping them alive. But eventually, reality came crashing down. Nathan pulled away first, his forehead resting against hers, his breath ragged. This is dangerous, he muttered. Mia's fingers curled into his shirt. I don't care. He let out a shaky breath. Ethan. She shut him up with another kiss, soft and slow this time, her lips tracing over his like a promise. Ethan's not the one standing here with me, she whispered. You are. Nathan let out a low curse. You're gonna ruin me, Mia. She smiled. Maybe you need to be ruined. He groaned, pressing his lips to her forehead before finally stepping back, creating just enough space to breathe. We have to be careful, he said, his voice hoarse. Mia nodded, even though part of her hated the idea of hiding. I know. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, looking torn. If he finds out, he already knows something happened, she reminded him. But if we keep this quiet, maybe we can figure it out before. A sharp knock at the door cut her off. Nathan stiffened. Mia's stomach dropped. A second later, Ethan's voice rang through the apartment. Nathan, open the damn door. Panic shot through her veins. Nathan's gaze locked onto hers, and for a split second, she saw the same panic mirrored in his eyes. But then his expression hardened, and he turned toward the door. Mia grabbed his arm. What are you doing? She whispered. His jaw tightened. I have to let him in. He's going to kill you, she hissed. Nathan smirked. He can try. Before she could stop him, he yanked the door open. Ethan stood on the other side, arms crossed, his expression thunderous. His gaze flickered past Nathan, straight to Mia. Mia swallowed hard. Ethan's entire body went still. Then his voice came low, dangerously calm. What the hell is she doing here? Nathan didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. Maybe you should be asking why she's here. Ethan's jaw clenched. Nathan. Nathan met his gaze head-on. Ethan. The tension was suffocating. Mia's heart pounded as she took a step forward. Ethan, please. His eyes snapped to her, filled with something dark and unreadable. Don't, he warned. Her throat tightened. Nathan let out a slow breath. Ethan, I know you're pissed. You have no idea. Ethan's voice was quiet, but there was rage simmering beneath the surface. Nathan exhaled. Look, man, I didn't plan for this to happen. But it did. His voice was steady, sure. And I'm not going to apologize for it. Mia's breath caught. Ethan's expression darkened. You should. Silence. Then Ethan took a slow step inside, his gaze flickering between the two of them. You really think this is a good idea? He asked, voice sharp. Nathan didn't hesitate. I think it's too late to worry about that. Ethan let out a humorless laugh. You son of a... Mia stepped between them, her heart racing. Ethan, stop. His eyes burned into hers. You knew this would blow up. You knew what this would do. She lifted her chin. I also knew I wanted him. Ethan's jaw tightened. Nathan's hand brushed against hers, barely there, but enough to ground her. Ethan ran a hand down his face, exhaling sharply. You're making a mistake. Mia met his gaze. No, I'm not. Silence. Then Ethan shook his head, looking at Nathan with something almost like betrayal. If you hurt her, I swear to God. I won't. Nathan's voice was firm, steady. But you need to accept that this isn't your call to make. Ethan stared at him, tension thick in the air. Then, finally, he let out a slow breath. I need time, he muttered, shaking his head. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The silence left in his wake was deafening. Mia let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling. Nathan pulled her into his arms without a word. And just like that, she knew, no matter what happened next, they had just crossed a line they could never go back from. The moment Ethan walked out, the weight of everything settled over Mia like a suffocating fog. She pulled away from Nathan, her heart still racing. He's never going to forgive us. Nathan watched the door for a long moment before turning back to her, his expression unreadable. He'll come around. She let out a humorless laugh. You don't know that. Nathan reached for her, but she took a step back, wrapping her arms around herself. Maybe this was a mistake. His jaw tightened. Don't do that. Do what? Pretend this doesn't mean something. Mia swallowed hard. It's not just about us, Nathan. It's about him. Nathan exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. I know, but I'm not going to let Ethan decide this for me. For us. She searched his face, looking for hesitation, doubt, anything to tell her that this wasn't worth fighting for. But she found none. Nathan wasn't the kind of man who said things he didn't mean. And right now, he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Her heart clenched. I don't want to lose him. Nathan's expression softened. Then we'll give him time. Mia bit her lip. And if he never accepts this? Nathan stepped closer, tilting her chin up until her eyes met his. Then I'll still choose you. Her breath caught. It was reckless, dangerous, a promise that neither of them should be making. But she believed him. Nathan sighed, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead before pulling back. You should go home. Let things cool down. Mia hesitated. You're pushing me away already? He gave her a tired smile. I'm giving you a chance to breathe. She exhaled slowly, knowing he was right. Okay. She turned toward the door, but before she could step outside, Nathan grabbed her wrist, spinning her back to him. Wait. His voice was rough. Then he kissed her, slow and deep, like he was memorizing every second. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against hers. "Good night, Mia." She let out a shaky breath. "Good night, Nate." And then she left, stepping out into the night, feeling like her entire world had just shifted in a way she could never undo. Days passed, then weeks. Mia barely saw Ethan. When she did, he kept his distance, his conversations clipped, his gaze unreadable. It was like they had gone from being inseparable to being strangers. It hurt more than she wanted to admit. Nathan tried to play it cool, acting like Ethan just needed time. But Mia knew him too well. She saw the way his shoulders tensed whenever her brother's name came up. The way he clenched his fists like he was holding back from fixing something he had no control over. They had fallen into a dangerous rhythm, stolen moments, whispered conversations, pretending the world outside didn't exist. But reality had a way of catching up. It happened on a quiet evening. Mia was in Nathan's apartment, curled up on the couch in one of his old sweatshirts, when the knock came. A heavy, familiar knock. Nathan's whole body tensed. He shot her a look before moving toward the door. When he pulled it open, Ethan stood on the other side, his expression unreadable. Mia froze. Ethan's gaze flicked past Nathan to her.
She didn't know what to expect.
More anger? A demand that she end things? A fight? Instead, Ethan just sighed. "This is real, isn't it?" His voice was quiet. Nathan's jaw clenched.
"Yeah."
A long silence stretched between them. Then Ethan exhaled, running a hand down his face. "I hate this." Mia swallowed hard. "Ethan." He shook his head. "No, let me say this." Nathan stepped aside, letting him in. Ethan looked at both of them, his eyes tired, conflicted. "You were supposed to be my best friend," he muttered at Nathan. "Not the guy who goes after my sister." Nathan didn't flinch. "I didn't go after her. It just happened." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "That's the problem. You didn't even think." Mia's heart pounded. "Ethan, we never meant to hurt you." "I know." His voice was quiet. She blinked. "You do." He sighed. "Look, I can't pretend I'm okay with this. I don't like it." But his jaw tightened. "I can't lose my sister over it." Mia's breath caught. Ethan met Nathan's gaze, his expression dark. "If you hurt her, I swear." Nathan nodded. "I won't." Ethan studied him for a long moment before finally sighing. "I still might punch you one day." Nathan smirked. "I'd expect nothing less." A tense silence followed. Then, slowly, something shifted. The worst was over. Maybe it would take time. Maybe Ethan would never truly be okay with it. But at least, for now, Mia had both of them in her life. That was enough. Nathan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. And for the first time in a long time, she finally let herself believe. This was real. This was worth it. And she wasn't letting go.